Ahmed, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So before we get started, what's the story with the cowboy hat?
I went to AWS reInvent last year, which was a few months ago.
Right.
I passed a boot barn and I thought, I'm going to buy myself a cowboy hat.
Okay. What did you do with the hat?
I wore the hat the entire time. It was really good for people who wanted to get in touch to find me because, you'd be in these large exhibition halls, very busy corridors, tens of thousands of people, but I was the only one wearing a cowboy hat.
Okay.
So I simply say to them, look for the fella in a cowboy hat, and they'd come and find me.
So it was basically a way for people to find you, kind of like finding a needle in a haystack, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that's an apt analogy because a lot of organizations feel like finding the right data at the right place at the right time for the right person is like finding a needle in a haystack. And I think you guys at FireMind know how to do that really well, right? Can you tell us a bit more about what you guys do?
Absolutely, yeah. So we talk about this concept called a data story. And what we do with a lot of our customers is we explain, okay, data is fine, but so what? If you want to try and find that data, someone has to think about that data and do something about it. So actually, let's think about why we're trying to find that data, where that data may be, what the frequency could be. And one of the key issues, again, that we say to a lot of our customers is then, what do you want to do with that data? Is it an overload? Are you showing too many things? Why should that person care about that data that's helping them maybe do their job better?
Okay. So, I can imagine a scenario, which I've seen also in many situations, where they don't really know what they're going to do with their data initially, especially if they have so much data coming from different data sources. So is there like let's say, a independent of the use case way to build up a mature data practice?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We generally ask 4 questions when we're talking about a data practice or a strategy or whatever you kind of want to call it, right?
Okay.
The first thing we say is actually give us a number for which having access to the data or your organization or whoever having access to data will move that number and promote that number in a positive direction, whether it's up, whether it's down, whether it's the same, for example. Give us a number. It can't be revenue, but it could be something that affects revenue. So productivity, for example, is a great one to look at, full-time employee hours. We then ask them, explain why that number is important. Of course, every company wants to be more productive, right? If your staff are more productive, they get an hour back every week. You think of that across a large enterprise organization, huge productivity increase. We then start looking where that data is. Is it readily accessible? Are there controls around it? Is there PII? Do we have to think about anything around compliance? And also wrangling the data. There's great tools on the cloud to help us wrangle that data and make it available when it needs to be available to the person. And then the fourth one is actually, who is that person? What is their role that will consume that data, where that data is, that will positively affect that number? Because it's always down to someone within this process. And we try to help them understand, okay, what are they going to do with that data? How can they action that data rather than having to think about doing something with it?
Right. So it all has to be anchored to some kind of business value at the end of the day.
Absolutely correct. Yeah. We have to show that we are moving the boat faster.
So, a lot of organizations want to implement AI and machine learning now. And sometimes it feels like maybe people are saying we want to implement it for the sake of implementing it. Is there any inherent value in it, or do those projects also have to be tied to business value?
We try to tie everything to business values.
Okay.
What we tend to do is we will work with the customer and we will draw a quadrant of deliverability and business impact.
Okay.
Obviously, we want stuff that is highest in terms of deliverability, so it's easy to deliver, and highest business value. Right. And we'll work with the business and help them understand that actually implementing a data strategy, implementing AI ML is incredibly beneficial, and you can start small.
Yeah.
So even if you just want to implement AI ML for the sake of AI ML, actually it's very easy to find use cases within your organization for which we can hone in that use case, find that number, and then draw value as well as doing something because you want to do it.
Okay, so your decision criteria, or helping an organization to make the right decision about how to implement AI ML, is not just a function of the business value, it's also a a function of the practicality or feasibility of delivering it, right?
Correct, absolutely correct. Whatever we talk about, we have to say that we're building everything to the standards that they require and to the standards that the industry requires as well, that we would see amongst ourselves. So we would always talk about, the well-architected framework on AWS, ensuring everything is resilient, scalable, cost-effective, and secure, of course.
Yeah.
So you could deliver ultimately anything on the cloud, right? You could probably do anything, but actually some things are technically easier to deliver and will drive higher business value than things that will be inherently hard to deliver and may have lower business value.
Right. And finding that magic quadrant, as they say sometimes, is the key really to make it work.
Absolutely correct. And it's all about engaging with the customer, running workshops with them. I'm a huge believer of going to the coalface, finding those people that are doing, high effort, low value work.
Yeah.
And saying to them, it's fine, that's okay. But if I can save you an hour within your organization, every day, for example, by helping automate this process as part of a greater strategy, that's a massive productivity increase.
I like what you said about finding people that are doing high effort, but low value or low output. Bit of a philosophical question. What is actually the value of AI ML? Is it saving effort? Is it making more revenue? Is it improving customer experience? Why even start to try and implement AI ML?
So I use a great analogy. If you're old enough like me, you may remember the A to Z books.
Okay.
How often do you use an A to Z book to get around London? You
Never,
don't. You use City Mapper,
right,
or Google Maps, or Apple Maps, or whatever.
Yeah.
So AI ML is around us, everywhere, looking at traffic in real time, looking at data in real time, looking at routes in real time. So we are already, as humans, using technology to help us be more productive. So the discussion we have with customers whom are doing high effort, low value work is actually, you can use AI ML to free you from this approach whereby you're accepting a business as usual status quo that I have to follow this process.
Yeah.
Well, actually, machine learning is about probability. Us humans are about probability. We can have a machine do that process because you, as an expert in that subject matter, at the coalface, able to understand what's happening within the business, it's more important for you to then apply yourself and do creative work that is of higher value than it is to simply do the high effort work just because you can.
Yeah. So it's kind of like we're offloading these very procedural things that we do that maybe a machine could do better to free up time for us humans, basically, to produce things that are creative, things that require ambiguity, things where the process is unknown, things where uniquely humans can add value.
Absolutely correct. And this is what's really magical, because then you understand just how much data there is within organizations and actually just how much external data organizations may reference. So one thing that's very interesting that we see with a lot of organizations is they'll say to us, well, here's our data lake. Here's our data warehouse, lake house, whatever you want to call it. But actually we'll find maybe 60, 75% of the time, they're actually using external data for which they don't reference because it's not within their internal systems.
Yeah.
And that external data could look at things like compliance, regulatory information. It could be competitor information, for example, all of which is very unstructured.
Yeah.
And because this is third-party data, you can't control it. You can't control the frequency.
Yeah.
Naturally, it's very easy to go, I will throw humans at it.
Right.
I will throw interns at it, and they'll do X, Y, Z. And then you end up having PowerPoints and dashboards and all these things, and you just end up having all this noise without actually saying, well, if I apply machine learning to the thought process of inferring that data, and I bring that into a correct data strategy that includes our internal data, then actually you have a large amount of possibilities, including scenario planning, including modeling and forecasting by going back in time and asking what if, with kind of the horizon scanning and the view of the world that machine learning gives us.
So there is a gap that I'm seeing. I think the value that you're communicating is clear. I think a lot of people know it intuitively, but still, and according to Gartner, 85% of AI ML projects fail to produce a return for a business. Why do you think that is? Why do so many projects fail to deliver?
I think because they're probably not scoped correctly. I think because they haven't really sat down and thought to themselves, is this actually going to move the boat? I did the conference for AWS back in October for business transformation. And on stage, I asked, so what? So what you did an AI ML project? What's the point? What does business as usual look like? The whole point of trying to implement that is so that it goes into business as usual, and that business as usual helps move the boat faster. So I'm not surprised by that, because I think, like you said earlier, a lot of the time people do them as vanity projects without thinking about the so whats.
Okay. Now, that brings us into GenAI, right? GenAI is getting massive interest these days, and I know you guys at FireMind are working on a lot of GenAI engagements. So what are the steps do you think an organization needs to take to make it successful, to avoid that 85% trap of even classical machine learning projects?
I think the biggest thing organizations need to understand when it comes to anything about machine learning, especially GenAI, is that they have to shift their mindset to a probabilistic mindset. So I get in front of customers and I say to them, we are used to computers being 0 and 1. As we're recording this video, it's writing zeros and ones to something somewhere, and that's what people will watch. But that's not what machine learning is. Machine learning, like us as humans, is about probability. Of course, there are deterministic machine learning models, but for the sake of purpose of generative AI, it's about probability. We say to a lot of our customers, you have to embrace the concept that it could be wrong. And you have to work out your acceptable precision. Because if you're saying that you always need 100% accuracy, we then have to think about what that really looks like in terms of machine learning and data as well. But if you're willing to accept that actually as a human, as part of a process you already have implemented, they're right 80 to 90% of the time, well, so are machine learning models. And once customers shift their mindset to actually, we as humans and everything around us is about probability, they can understand really how machine learning and generative AI can add value to their business.
Can you give an example of that? Like maybe a use case or an engagement you've seen where that shift needed to happen, and when it happened, it started to make things successful?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the most fundamental applications of generative AI that we use is helping our FSI insurance customers understand what's happening in their call center.
Okay.
So we will take call center information, we will use transcribe, and then we will run a number of generative AI and ML tasks against that information. Because here in the UK, FCA guidance states that an insurance company, for example, must adhere to a certain number of principles and guidance when it comes to vulnerable customers. So one key thing a lot of our FSI insurance customers are asking us is, how do I know if this customer is vulnerable without someone calling up and saying, I am vulnerable? No one does that. So how do we use machine learning with generative AI to interpret, to understand what's being said within that transaction between the customer and the call agent to go, this looks like a vulnerable customer. And then alert to the call agent, okay, this is what you should do because FCA guidance says X, Y, Z. You should follow X, Y, Z. The complete hypothesis there is actually, we take all of that data and we say to our insurance customer, your script that you're running in the call center is actually a median performing agent. But what does a better, good, the best performing agent look like? How do you then redo that training to all your agents, provide them with the best tools possible to give their customers not only regulated advice, but also the best advice to give you a competitive edge against your customers? And that's a real life example there.
And in that example, what is the shift from binary to probabilistic that you're talking about? Like, what did they need to change in their mindset to embrace the more probabilistic world when it comes to machine learning?
Absolutely. So vulnerability is a really, really interesting one.
Yeah.
Because people can be vulnerable in different ways.
Yeah.
For example, you could have absolutely everything tied down. You could be on top of absolutely everything, and then there could be bereavement. And that bereavement could trigger a series of events that makes your world crumble, basically. Suddenly, that person is vulnerable, having to call up car insurance to cancel because they're dealing with the bereavement, right? So to a call agent, there is a set script. They've come in this way, it's a midterm adjustment, they have to follow this thing, £50 fee. But actually, this person is dealing with the bereavement. We have empathy as humans, but the script is telling me I have to apply a £50 cancellation fee. using generative AI to go, well, actually, it looks like you're dealing with a bereavement. And although the script says this, our guidelines and FCA guidelines and all that say, actually, you should waive that fee. So although the script will be binary, 0 and 1, this is what you should follow, using AI to help that agent make a better customer-focused decision is truly important and then truly drives up NPS scores of that insurance company.
But the CDO of that insurance company needs to take the leap of faith that, you know what, the GenAI recommendation may be incorrect, maybe the person is vulnerable or maybe not, and we might overcharge or undercharge in certain situations, but overall it would be a net positive and we need to be comfortable with those failure rates.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. Nothing is certain.
Yeah.
And this is why, for example, we talk about the so what.
Yeah.
Now that we've deployed this thing, okay, what does business as usual look like? What do our recall rates look like? Are we 80 to 90%? Do we need to add some fine tuning? Do we need to add some training, for example? Do we need to add some special logic to this machine to help understand specifically how the FCA wants an agent to act, or how the insurance company wants the agent to act? Or maybe there's a new type of vulnerability that we're not aware of. This is exactly the point where you were saying projects fail, because they get to a point in time and go, oh, well, that machine learning project was only good up till now. And we talk about, well, what's the next? What's the so what? When does bias, when does doubt, when does drift occur? And how do we deal with that with our customers to make sure they're getting the best out of the technology that's available?
I think part of it as well is this discomfort with having a machine accountable for something, right? If a human makes a mistake or they have a certain failure rate, we're comfortable with that because we can hold a certain human accountable. But if a machine makes a mistake, what do? It's like the trolley problem with self-driving cars. You know, it's very tragic, difficult, ethical dilemma. If you have somebody vulnerable in front of you, do you swerve out of the way and hit somebody else who's vulnerable? Or how do you calculate, let's say, the collateral damage, for lack of a better term? This is a big problem, and I think a lot of people who are in charge who need to make the decision of implementing GenAI or even just regular AI and machine learning, they're in a position where they need to codify their ethics in a way. And that's an issue that is ongoing. Have you seen any kind of discomfort from somebody you've worked with or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I reference a great AWS term: think big, start small, scale fast. We're not here to try and boil the ocean.
Yeah.
Let's start small, let's start somewhere isolated, and let's build and let's learn and let's scale from there.
Yeah.
The other thing as well with the trolley problem is I always say, well, why does no one press the brake? Okay.
Right.
So let's apply guardrails. You know, this is the exact discussion we have with customers. Okay, fine. The machine will be 80% right. So how do we put in certainty for that last 20% where we can't be sure the machine can be correct? So we put in additional checks, additional guardrails, maybe human in the loop, for example, to do as much as we can to get us close to 100. And that's the approach we take. Every use case is different. Every CDO, every organization is different. But the beautiful thing about machine learning, and actually the beautiful thing about generative AI, is that now we can reason using natural language. We don't have to have people that understand data science. Not saying that we shouldn't be using data scientists, but it means that we can put it in front of Bob, who is speaking to customers every single day, and try to understand how they deal with any issues that may occur and try to feed that back into the model.
So how do we make GenAI real? Who actually needs it and when? And if we find out that we do need it, how do we make it work on the ground, pragmatically?
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
The honest answer is that GenAI is part of a suite of tools. Again, you know, we focus on data, AI, ML. GenAI is part of our arsenal, our Swiss Army knife when we come to customers.
Yeah.
It may not be for everyone, and that's okay. You don't have to always have the newest shiny thing.
Yeah.
We use generative AI in pretty much all of our use cases because actually what generative AI allows us to do, like I was saying earlier, is that it allows us to reason with a model just using natural language. And this is incredibly powerful because we could have a pipeline, for example, whereby we're running through several pieces of data, but someone then wants to go, how does that work? can you explain that for me? Can I potentially reason with it? Because in my head, I have a chain of thought, how I want to reason with that data. And I'm going to explain that to you in natural language, and I want you to take that and then give it to a machine. Better yet, we give them a sandbox and say, hey, listen, cut us out, take it for a few weeks, and actually you explain to the machine and you validate with the machine, your chain of thought becomes its chain of thought, and you ask it why it came to these decisions. And suddenly what we're doing is we're empowering people who have been stuck in a process, stuck with certain tools that didn't do everything they did, and their human aspect had to deal with that as a buffer. We're giving them that ability to kind of define their own process. And that's where generative AI becomes so powerful here, because anyone can use it to put down their chain of thought against that data they want to reason against.
If I were to bring this back to what you said earlier about anchoring an AI ML project to business value, and also what you're saying now about GenAI, coming full circle, it seems to me like for GenAI, you have to take the same process of qualification in your organization to see if it has business value. However, there's new possibilities now because number one, you can use natural language to communicate with the models themselves, and also, of course, the interface that you ultimately offer to the customers of your organization. But you don't necessarily have to have all of the steps codified in the process like you would with classical machine learning. It's that sandboxing approach, right? You go iteratively, train it. It is smarter than a deterministic machine learning model that only does something specific. It will learn by itself. I mean, I'm simplifying, but I mean, for our purposes as humans from the outside, it kind of learns by itself. And it's much smarter than the very precise approach and very precise application that you have to take for a regular machine learning model. So it's kind of a faster way, but with the same or maybe more business value.
Yeah, it's about speed and scale. You said it exactly there. So we don't necessarily say that these machines are smart. They require your context, but they give you the scale. Because if you're sitting there and you're having to process 100 documents a day, okay, fine. Show the machine how you do that. It will do those within minutes for you. And that's the beauty about it. It's giving us the scale. One thing that I say to a lot of our customers when we meet them and they say, I say, the first 15 to half an hour, 15 minutes, half an hour, that you're going to have with that machine is going to be the most frustrating time of your life. But I explain to them, and I apologize if my kids are listening, my children are like little lawyers. And I explain to them, well, if you have kids, you will understand that when they come to you and say, Mummy, Daddy, can I do this? And you say no. They will keep asking the same question over and over again, sometimes in slightly different ways, until you give them the right answer, which is yes. It's the same approach we have to take with these machines. We keep going at them with that mindset of being a little lawyer until, if I phrase it like this, if I give it this context, that's good. What it's given me there is really good. So even before we think about training or RAG or anything like that, we just go, here is a vanilla model. Go knock yourself out.
So let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the underlying data. A lot of people want to implement GenAI or a classic AI machine learning, and a lot of times you can see the business value from it. The use case is obvious, but there's so many prerequisites that need to happen for it to work, right? What needs to happen before we're ready to implement AI ML? What are the steps or the journey that an organization needs to take?
In a magical, ideal world with, rainbows and unicorns, every organization's data would have been individually wrangled by a PhD data science student already, right? So off the get-go, we're ready to go. But of course, we don't live in an ideal world. Again, the magic of GenAI here, before even going to machine learning, is actually you can quantify whether this model can understand the data. We talk about this concept, garbage in, garbage out. Absolutely. You run a load of garbage through a deterministic algorithm like XGBoost, you're going to get garbage out. But one thing you could do with generative AI is you could put that garbage in there, you could provide context to that garbage, and suddenly it may still be garbage, but it might be a bit less garbagey. And I think that's a great way to start. A lot of the time we speak to customers who aren't quite sure how to wrangle their data or why to wrangle their data. So again, we follow the approach of, well, think big, start small, and then scale that process very fast. We often work with our customers to think about what does their data approach look like within the organization. Is it something they need to hire for? Is it a process? Is it operating procedures? And most importantly, why are we doing this in the first place? Who is that person that shouldn't be asking so what about this number, should be looking at that number going, I need to do something about it. So again, it's all about that business process. And generative AI gives us a nice foot in the door to test the waters, to almost allow us to know to which area within that lake or that sea to set sail, to get that data, wrangle it, and then start putting it through a process.
So GenAI gives us a bit more leeway than before, where if we have enough context, we could overcome some of the gaps in the data, which is great because nobody has a perfect data landscape. But assuming that we're not looking at GenAI only, we're looking at the whole data estate. We want to optimize the end user experience. We want to provide real-time dashboards. We need all the numbers to be correct for the board meeting on Monday morning. All of those different elements, right? What are the building blocks that we would need for a complete data journey so that we have a high-powered data machine basically in the org, independent of what our use cases are?
The honest answer is it depends. Okay. Because again, you could create the best data lake project, but it will only be good at a point in time. So we talk about this concept with a lot of our customers, data doubt. So absolutely, you could take a piece of data, create a data lake, create a warehouse, create a lovely dashboard, but what happens 10 minutes before that board meeting, 2 people get different numbers. Or you implement a strategy to allow the democratization of data, people to go query the data themselves. But again, people have slightly misunderstood the schema, misunderstood the data, and have got different answers. If you're focused on net new greenfield building, who's going to deal with that P1? So we talk about this concept called data doubt. One thing we do with a lot of our customers is we help them build that process, and we help them build an MSP that either we manage for them or we help them manage themselves.
MSP?
So like a managed service providing.
Okay.
And what that means is that when it is 10 to 9 on a Monday and someone has 50 and someone has 51, they pick up the phone and go, what's happened here? And either us or that team will deal with that information. Because actually, it all starts from that number. What is the number we're trying to move within the organization? Yeah. But we can't just stop the projects once it's been handed over, because then we're talking about failure rates. So we always have to continue that so what, that business as usual. And that's such a key aspect to any project, because as you start building the strength and the literacy within the organization, you end up adding more data sources, and it can become very, very foggy very, very quickly. Suddenly, those 50 data sources have become 500. How do I manage that? So we help our customers understand, deal with that kind of threat of too much data, deal with that threat of too many requests, and help them understand how to steer the business in such a way that actually the person presenting in that board meeting understands the lineage of that data, why that number is like that, without having to rely on someone else.
A lot of the focus is really about delivering that initial use case and making that big bang effect, the model MVP works, or the first iteration of the dashboard. But sometimes the business as usual is overlooked. Can you unpack a bit about the importance of getting the operations right and how you and FireMind help organizations to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I say this is the boring stuff, but actually it's the boring stuff that's most interesting.
It keeps the lights on, right?
It keeps the lights on, exactly. And I can't emphasize enough just how important BAU has to be. One thing we are very lucky, because we build on AWS, I coined this term that Amazon services allows us to be lazy. And we say that to our customers. Serverless, the resilience, the ability to be multi-region, multi-AZ, for example, means that you have to worry about less things lower down the line that may affect business as usual. So we say to a lot of our customers, how can we offload a lot of this operational stuff to AWS using tools like Lake Formation, for example, tools like Redshift, Glue, Athena, the resilience that we have and the durability of storing data in S3, for example. This means that we can then focus on really driving business value. And one of the key things we talk about with our customers is you treat the concept of BAU like a Kanban approach. So you deal with everything in a just-in-time basis. And then what you do is you ensure that as you're increasing the data volume, increasing the machine learning, for example, maybe increasing the usage of these tools, you're always thinking about support. Because those tools could be brilliant in that big bang, but what happens when it is Friday, 5:30 p.m., you're on the train, and suddenly it's a P1? You have to think about those.
What's a P1?
P1 is priority one incident.
Okay.
You know, this is affecting business. We're losing revenue. The world is on fire, right? So no one wants to deal with that on a crowded train coming out of London, going home. Let's be honest, right? We've probably all been there. But it's mitigating those steps to deal with that. And again, this is why we're so grateful to build on AWS, because it allows us to have a factor of resilience and efficiency and scalability that we don't want to manage ourselves.
So assuming that we've offloaded the heavy lifting onto some of these services on AWS, still having a data ops practice is important. What are the pillars or building blocks of a resilient data ops practice, in your opinion, that you would advise organizations to build?
Absolutely. Yeah. So again, each organization is different. Yeah. I firmly believe that data ops, ML ops, FM ops, all that lovely stuff, that stems out of, I would say, the traditional, original DevOps. You know, back when I was younger, you know, we would deploy CI on Hudson CI, right? You know, Git was a new thing because we were still using SVN, right? So I've been very fortunate that the leaders who I worked under were quick to point me down the route of automate everything. You know, automate as much as you can. The beautiful thing of understanding basic DevOps, you know, understanding, if we're talking about Git, for example, correct versioning, correct staging, for example, having a ticket attached to any piece of work you're doing for a branch, is it forms a foundation of true documentation and true structure in how we approach a hotfix, a feature, an enhancement, for example, right? These can then be expanded from that core of DevOps into, you know, security, data practice, ML ops, LLM ops, for example, all that kind of stuff. And when we're thinking about specifically data ops, there are so many variables we have to think about because, yeah, you have your data lake here, but before you can start playing with that live data that may contain PII information, you have to take that schema over here to your development environment, test it within your staging environment. These are all basic engineering principles that we see within the DevOps community that we use as practice within our data ops, ML ops, and FFM, LLM ops, and FM ops as well.
So those foundational engineering principles from where all of the ops come out of, how does that help in that scenario when you're on the train, 5:30 p.m. Friday? What do you do?
Oh, you just press the rollback button.
Right.
And as if by magic,
fine. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah, it's all rainbows and unicorns already. It's not sometimes always like that, but actually, with true correct resilience, you can do that. Yeah. Because again, using the power of, you know, versioning on things like S3, for example, proper snapshotting on things like Redshift, for example, you can just press that go back button. And what that allows you to do is say, okay, well, we see that these features weren't correctly tested. So we're going to go back to before that feature was released, which allows BAU to work. And then we'll come back and look at that feature again before we then deploy it. This is just standard engineering principles that we see within DevOps. The whole purpose of DevOps was exactly that. I deploy to production. Oh no, I've broken production. I go back one commit and then I fix it on staging.
So sometimes we're kind of really interested by this shiny new thing called GenAI. And at the end of the day, just basic resilience and having the discipline to have the right DevOps, ML ops, data ops, whatever, is still super important.
Absolutely.
Day in, day out, to make sure that the business is running properly so that we can continue to take actually more risks, right? So that we can have a place where we can experiment, where we can sandbox, because we know that we have the critical issues covered.
Correct. And it's small things like ensuring that when the data scientist is using their notebooks, that they're committing to Git.
Right.
So that if that laptop suddenly falls into the river, they haven't lost all of their work, right? This is small, simple stuff that should just be embedded in the thought process, really, of kind of good engineering practice.
So we talked about a lot of different concepts today. It might be overwhelming for an organization that is growing or an organization that is established but is new to developing these capabilities in their organization. How can you, as FireMind, for example, help these organizations to build out a robust practice? And when should they build capabilities in-house? And when should they augment it with system integrators such as yourselves?
It's a good question. And again, I think it depends, is the honest answer. What I would say is that we are incredibly fortunate that we can work with AWS, who help us with every opportunity we work with. And that could be through training, funding, all the lovely stuff that AWS, such as videos like this, right? Sure. The thing that we say to any business that's going down this route is, it's okay, don't be scared, because there's documentation there and there's a community behind it, and it's great to get started. But when you work with someone like us, what we will do is we'll always talk about the concept of starting with a ramp. The best thing we want to do is to make sure that we empathize with the challenges that you're faced with, whether it's from stakeholders, the business, customers, or whoever. And then we want to enable you by using ramp concepts. So what does V0 look like? Can we build a ramp up to V0? So then from V0, you can say, okay, we'll take it from here and go to V1, and we help and we come on a hands-off approach, or we build V1 for you and we go on a hands-on approach, for example.
Yeah.
So we talk about ramping them up as quickly as we can. And again, that means utilizing the best of AWS to ensure that we have the scalability, the resilience that AWS gives us as well.
So this is really about making them successful, not just delivering something and leaving. It's actually helping them accelerate the ramp up, basically, build those capabilities in-house so that they can be independent after that.
Exactly. And going back to my point around a data MSP, it's very easy for customers to go, I want to then build the next thing. And what we say is, okay, fine, we'll look after that thing that you built, or the 10 things that you built, and you carry on and do more greenfield stuff, which is fine. We look after the boring stuff, so you don't have to.
Ahmed, FireMind has done a lot of great projects here in the UK and abroad as well. If people want to connect with you or find out more about what FireMind can do with them, get them started on their data journey, where should they go?
Best thing to do is probably speak to their AWS account manager, because we only build in AWS. They can go to the website, firemind.com. They can go find me on LinkedIn, for example. Generally, I'm the only one wearing a Stetson within the City of London, so they can probably find me on a train or a Lime bike. Other bikes are available as well. But honestly, the best thing to say is, reach out to us on the website. We're generally at events. I'm very fortunate that I get to travel to great AWS offices. I'm in New York and then Seattle next week, for example. But also, we have such a great team supporting us at AWS, from all the lovely account managers, all the SAs, and everyone else that supports us, that they can just point that customer in the right direction. And that's always the best way to start.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. I learned a lot, and I hope our viewers and listeners did too. Thanks for joining the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you.